Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Cronkright, one of the founders and executive chairman of CertifID. This is our last installment of To Catch a Fraudster webinar series for 2024. It was a phenomenal lineup. Thank you for all of you that regularly attend and those of you that maybe this is your first time. I'm going to share my screen real quick here before I get in trouble by my team. So bear with me one second. What we're going to go over today. So our series, each month, we're really committed to providing not only education, but a perspective that you can take back to your organizations and your communities about just the safety and soundness of real estate transactions, particularly around cyber fraud. And today we're going to be speaking specifically about the most widely observed instances, both in buyer side frauds on cash to close or EMD, how sellers are protected. And we're going to get into one of the most widely publicized cases nationally around seller impersonation fraud and also payoff. So we're going to hit kind of the big trifecta. The only thing not on here is seller net. But again, seller net, I can voice over while we're going through the payoff piece of it. So without further ado, we're going to start with the buyer fraud story. We have some amazing guests. All of us are victims when a wire fraud takes place. I think that's worth noting. Whether or not it's your funds or somebody else's funds, all of us have time, energy, and risk in all of these transactions. But the four people we have on today were actual victims. And what I want to say as to this is it takes a lot of courage and it takes a tremendous amount of bravery to tell your story. For those of you that I have not met, I'm also a wire fraud victim. I know exactly what this feels like. So we're going to have some very intimate conversations about each of their experiences for the purpose of just learning from them and how much of a journey this now has become in protecting the funds. So there's no shame, there's no blame, there's no space for that in this webinar. So as you may have questions, put them in the Q&A. And you'll have an opportunity at the end of each segment to speak to them. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mike Musto. Mike Musto is an educated professional. I was just on the phone with one of the national publications, and they think that how can people fall victim to these things, right? I mean, this must be, is there a certain educational or is there a certain demographic? Is there a certain socioeconomic target? And I said, absolutely not. I mean, I'm an attorney and my pocket got picked for $180,000. And I had been a title company owner at that point for 10 years before. So, but Mike, I know that we couldn't get your camera working, but one, thank you for joining. And I'd like to just maybe walk us through the transaction that you were involved in. You lost almost $600,000 to a wire fraud as a buyer, and how, as you look back, some of the strategies that you saw these bad actors use to influence you or convince you into believing that you were speaking with your attorney and your agent.
Right. Well, good to be here. Thanks, Tom. Yes. So, well, I'll start with what happened. This was a real estate transaction where I was buying an auto suite in Naples, Florida, and an auto suite is just basically it's a garage condominium. And on September 25th, I wired $578,000 to what I thought was the title company. Everything before, I've done a number of transactions like this, so there was nothing out of the ordinary that I saw. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. And so I wired the funds to the title company. I got an email that said they got the funds and they were going to be ready to close. And so we were supposed to close on September 27th. On September 28th, my realtor called me, who's also a good friend of mine, and said, Mike, what happened to the funds? Did you have a problem wiring them? I'm like, what are you talking about? I wired them on Wednesday. It's Saturday now. And when he said that, I immediately looked back at the emails, and I noticed that the emails that I was sending them to was basically my lawyer's exact email address, his full name at napleslaw.cam, as well as the title company, the woman who was handling the title transfer. Hers was Evelyn at graystreettitle.cam. And my realtor's name was also in a .cam. So I'm like, uh-oh, we're in big trouble. And I knew that something was up at that point. That was where I knew that something was really wrong. Talked to the lawyer. I went to my bank, which was Bank of America, and of course on weekends, no one's open to handle a claim like this. I went to Citizens Bank, which is the bank that I wired the funds to, and they wouldn't give me a lot of information other than I did pry a little bit, and basically found out that I couldn't get any information from them, but that from what I thought, the funds were gone from this person's account that I had wired to. So I went back in time back to September 13th, realizing, and again, I wired the funds on September 25th, and found the start of these emails from these .cams characters, and come to find out that my lawyer and the title company and my realtor, they were getting emails from what they thought was me. And my email address is michaeljmusto@gmail.com, Michael J. Musto. They were getting emails from Michael J.R. Nusto. So they swapped out the M in Musto for an RN. And if you look on a laptop or if you look on your phone, it's very hard to distinguish the little space between an R and an N, and it looks like an M. So they were getting emails, from what they thought was me, but it wasn't. So, come to find out that the woman from the title company never even emailed the real me. So, from early in September, she was emailing back and forth to these scammers, to the Michael J.R. Nusto at gmail.com email. So they had created that email. They had created these .cams, which I don't know how that could be allowed, in this world. Talking about, an easy target for these scammers. So the Evelyn from the title company actually sent the scammers all of the real closing documents, including the directions for wiring funds. And so, when I got so the scammers then sent, from Evelyn at graystreettitle.cam, sent to me, and my lawyer attached the .cam, the fake email. They just transferred the actual closing documents that they got from the title company, sent them to me, and then they manipulated their title instructions so that it looked exactly like Gray Street's titles directions, and they changed the account numbers on it. And so I got it, and I didn't think twice, and I sent $578,000. Luckily for me, and I'm not sure how it all transpired, but I went to meet Bank of America first thing Monday morning, let them know the story, and they made an effort to recall the funds from Citizens Bank, which was the account that I had sent the funds to. Um, and uh, and there was no communication with Citizens Bank other than I did find out who the name of the company that's on that account, and it turned out to be a company that doesn't even exist. Um, so not sure if Citizens Bank kind of held the funds because I had sent it to Gray Street Title, and it was going into this other account or what have you. But luckily, I did get the funds back. But it was a very scary time, and I thought everything was gone. And quite honestly, I started thinking about, who am I going to point fingers at here? The title company, they never even emailed the right me, so they weren't, they didn't check the exact email address that they were sending things to, and my lawyer too. They had him fooled as well.
Mhm.
So there was a lot of thought going on, and luckily it turned out to the right thing happened, but it could have been a real mess, as a legal mess, with me pointing fingers at the title company and so forth. So
And
that's
Mike,
kind of what it.
nothing out of the ordinary. I just want to backfill a couple things here. Nothing out of the ordinary as far as the emails, the communication, the timing of the communication, everything just seemed to flow like, because again, what I find interesting, you're a well-educated, individual. You've done multiple transactions. This isn't and I'm not indicting first-time home buyers, but not your first rodeo, right? Down through a real estate deal. And looking back, I mean, other than after you were notified, nothing in the communication stood out.
Well, it didn't stand out, but then when I look back, there was one weird email from the fake lawyer email, the .cam, that basically they kind of welcomed me, even though I know him. So, but then I just figured it was, it must be a boilerplate email that he sends out when,
Yeah.
they're ready to do a deal. Other than that, you know, they were genius. I thought, and they fooled us all
Well,
completely. And the title, like I said, the title company never even communicated with me
yeah,
ever.
ironically, we saw, I call this kind of they're sitting as the switch or the node of all the communications. We saw this for the first time on a Gulf of Mexico property about 3.5 years ago, just north of Naples, where very similar thing out of the jump on, they got the jump on the communication. That was about a 3.5 week cycle, but essentially nobody was really communicating with the correct party on the other side. And I wanted to highlight your story, Mike, because the level of effort and sophistication, domain registration, email account opening, probably a compromised email account somewhere to at least get the initial, set of instructions and the details about who was even going to be assigned as the escrow. I mean, somebody somewhere, right? It doesn't sit in the ethos, and that's always hard to determine post game. The use of R and N to swap out even your registration, because you have Gmail, so they couldn't do anything with that, right? So they had to use your name and work an M around on an RM swap out. Very, very sophisticated, very intentional, and controlling all of the communication between the parties. So what's interesting is I asked you, does anything stand out? Well, the assumption then is nothing stood out to your law firm, nothing stood out to the title company, nothing stood out to the agent when they were receiving everyone else's communications about scheduling closing, review of the closing statement, clearing title commitments for close. I mean, think about guys on the back end, the communications that they also went through to convince everybody else that we're ready to close and it's an insurable transaction. It's fascinating. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. We're getting one glimpse of it from Mike. So, Mike, one last question. We're going to move on to Sarah's. Thank you. But would you have initiated legal action had your recovery had the recovery turned out differently?
Yes,
Without a doubt.
no question.
Would you
I
have
was,
named everyone in the transaction? Would you have named the title company, the law firm, and the agent?
well, uh, I I'm friends with the lawyer and the agent, so definitely the title company. I felt that, security 101 for a title company is make sure you're emailing the exact right address.
Right.
So but yes, absolutely. There was $578,000 at stake.
Um, do do you think, looking back, Mike, do you feel you were prepared for this level of threat by anyone that was helping you along the journey?
What do you mean by?
Were were you properly read in or educated about the risk of your almost
Yes,
$600,000 and
yes,
watch out for?
yes.
Who did?
I felt comfortable enough to send it along, and
No,
then
but did the attorney, the agent, or the title company specifically educate you about the risk of wire fraud and what to watch out for?
no, because they weren't communicating with me.
Right.
They were communicating with the fraudsters. So I was only communicating with the fraudsters through the .com email addresses that they created. Whereas, the lawyer, the title company, and the agent were communicating with the Michael J.R. Musto at Gmail. So, but the it was all about the email addresses, and how you just overlook, especially the .cams. I had no idea that existed. And that's, it fooled me. And obviously, an RN instead of an M. I mean, you need to see it next to each other, so that you
Yeah.
can see how it's so difficult to tell the difference, that there's a space between the R and the N.
So Mike, one last question, I think it's spot on, that came in from Tracy is, we're all in the industry. We're all trying to protect you and your closing funds. What advice would you give us? What could have been done in your mind that would have alerted you uh, to not only the risk, but maybe not even getting as far as even, considering wiring funds?
Well, I mean, number one is the email address. A title company sending out actual closing documents, need to double, triple check to make sure that they're sending it to the right email. And secondly, they should have called me. And I guess that's my fault too. I I didn't see the .cams, and
But
they didn't call me, which I've been called before.
but
In
Mike,
transition.
were you asked to call? Did you ever talk to the title
No,
company? In fairness, okay, all right,
no, because the email, the directions from the scammers didn't say that. So they had a different, their page on wiring instructions didn't include, call us when you're wiring it,
right, right.
or, we'll call you when we get it, type of thing.
Hey, Tom, can I ask a real quick question? This is Joe here.
100%.
Hey, Mike, really helpful story. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of these types of stories where I sit. And I was wondering, because a lot of people might not be familiar with this issue, I was wondering if the transaction ultimately closed, because in a lot of these frauds, there are sometimes damages that people suffer beyond the actual, in your case, wired funds. Oftentimes the transaction gets totally derailed. Monies that the buyers put into the transaction, whether in due diligence or other things, are sometimes lost. So I guess I was just wondering if your transaction ultimately did close, and if that was part of your experience, or if you avoided that.
Yes, it did close. I was fearful
Good to
of,
hear.
I was very fearful of wiring the funds. So I had
Yeah,
a
sure.
advisor of mine grab the funds immediately. As soon as the funds came back in my account, I had my advisor grab the funds, and then we sat for a bit and closed 2 weeks later, and I had him wire the funds to
Yeah,
the title.
understandable.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks.
Very very stressful for a time there, and I'm sure it's so easy to, if you look back at what they did, it seems genius, but I guess there's a method, and they know how to do it. And I thought the R end instead of an M was a genius move. So
Well, Mike, we could talk to you the rest of this time.
Yeah.
Thank you for this is very helpful. I can tell by the comments that your courage to share your story is very much appreciated. Thanks for allowing Certified in whatever role we played. It's hard to know exactly on our recovery services efforts, but you had a lot of people rooting for those dollars to come back with our law enforcement partners as well. But thank you. I'm glad, and hopefully you're enjoying the auto suite now, and I trust this will be something you'll never forget. So,
Absolutely.
but thank you. I'll let you sign off and have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Incredible. And had they added on generative AI and they added on some additional layers that we're seeing, it would have taken that to a whole nother level. So, all right, switching gears. That was our consumer kind of segment on buyer cash to close. I thought a properly sophisticated example where you have transaction participants that never actually communicated with each other, essentially during the last 2 weeks leading up to closing. Sarah, hello.
Hi.
Sarah and I have gotten to know each other the last couple months. Sarah has a very, very interesting story. I'll do a little intro, Sarah, because we've gotten to know each other. Sarah's now an entrepreneur, been in the business for over 15 years. Do I have that right by memory?
Just over 20, actually.
20. All right. I'm off already.
Even worse, right?
And decided, no, not at all. And
Yeah.
decided to venture out and get your own underwriting agreement and essentially be an entrepreneur and lead the charge as an owner of Unique Title. And that was in earlier this year, right? In February-ish?
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right. I'm batting 500 now. So let's see how we do. And then you have a small team, as I understand it, standard operating procedures. One of them included, payoff verification. And somewhere late summer, 3 payoffs totaling $900,000 roughly in a 4-week period were diverted. And I want, and 2 of those actually diverted out of your escrow account. And I'm gonna lead off from there, hand this off to you, Sarah, to just maybe talk through what late summer looked like. I know we were heavily involved in kind of continue to be in mitigating this thing down. You're still standing, and I applaud the courage and the grit that you have shown in the last 4 or 5 months. It's nothing short of truly extraordinary. But yeah, tell us your story, please.
Well, I'm still standing thanks to the certified team and Tom and all the guidance and everyone that stood behind me. So I'm very grateful to be here, and hopefully sharing my story will help protect someone else from what we had gone through. August of this year is when everything kind of started, when I was notified, and I can remember the exact location I was as I'm traveling, getting a call from my office saying, "Hey, we wired a payoff yesterday, and the lender just called us, local financial institution, and said they didn't receive the wire." So we kind of peeled it back and said, well, let's track it. Let's go back and see where we're at. And, it's the day after we wired, so we should have some options. Long story short, the payoff that we received was not received encrypted. However, our internal company policy was that If you received a non-encrypted email, you would be calling and vetting and verifying that wire. I was told by an employee that yes, that happened, when in fact, no, it didn't. The wire was sent and we contacted our bank, who contacted Citizens Bank, who is the receiving or the party that we sent the wire to. No help. The banks did their piece of back and forth trying to confirm IC3 reports, fraud reports, Federal Trade Commission reports, calls to insurance companies, calls to my underwriter, in tears. It was chaos. I was sick. I wired $311,785.36, and this money is missing. So I'm thinking, okay, worst case scenario at the time, I have insurance. I'll deal with that later. Let's work on these pieces. The most important call I made at that time was to CertifID, because I was getting no answers from my bank. Like, how can this possibly take that long? And mind you, this is instance number one. We go through the process, CertifID gets involved, we're going through recovery efforts. I mean, we're still 6 weeks in, we haven't heard anything about that wire coming back. In the interim, you know, it's a construction loan at a 12% rate of interest, still accruing interest at 12% on 300,000 at $100 a day. That's racking up, that I'm going to ultimately be responsible for. People's credit are on the line because documents have been signed and notes, and there's maturity dates approaching. So I'm making $4,000 interest only principal payments to save my client's credit. And, you know, as I work through all these steps, and all of a sudden we get phone call number two. Phone call number two was for a payoff that we had wired out on, it was August 1st. And on the 28th of August, the seller had contacted us and notified us that his mortgage company called him saying his payoff hadn't been received, or that he was late on his payment. So we started investigating further, you know, as we're working through all of the insurance pieces and insurance denials and everything else, and panicking, trying to lock down and make sure our environment is safe. So, you know, we've got forensic scans being done on our computers by the top forensic team in the United States, making sure our environment is safe. We're calling and verifying that every wire that left our escrow account has arrived at that mortgage company, making sure sellers' proceeds have been received, going through all of our checks, all of these things in the midst of chaos. And again, I'm panicking, going, $311,000 is missing. This is a big deal. I'm not sleeping. I'm not eating. Wire number two, we start immediately got the phone call, and the first call that I made was not even to the bank. My first call was to Nate at CertifID. I'm just going, I don't know how through that process I was still standing, other than the fact that I knew I had the team behind me, between Tom saying, you know, here's some things that I can help provide you as a resource, being a victim myself. Here's some things to look at and some of the people that can help you through this. And mind you, I'm sorry for the tears, but I mean, my whole world was crumbling. I'm going, this is my livelihood. I have, you know, a personal life that is kind of wonky at the time as well, with being, you know, I'm going through a divorce. I've got a custody of a grandchild. So it's chaos everywhere. And I'm going, I thought I was safe here and that I was protected. And now I've got two. So Nate was my first call to start the recovery efforts, and then the formalities of all the paperwork all over again and insurance stuff. This case happened to be a realtor who was the seller with his mortgage payoff. Another realtor who's a good client of mine was the buyer. So of all transactions to have money go missing on, it's two people that I work with and respect in the industry and that are colleagues of mine. So you stand side by side. You know, it's been, you know, Christmas parties and kids' birth of children and all of those things. So that's a personal thing as well. So working through that process within a matter of a week, mind you, we still hadn't gotten confirmation of what the status was on the first wire we sent and if any money was recoverable. The second wire, within a week, Nate got back to me and was able to tell me that, you know, luckily, based on the information in the holds, the financial institution that received the funds has, there was still $58,000 left on that payoff wire. Now, mind you, we're at the 30-day mark. I thought money was gone and there was nothing that could be done and would be a complete loss. But again, Nate and the certified team were able to pin it down, act very quickly, and jump and recover that 58,000. At the same time we were working through that process, we received a call from a client that we had represented as a seller. She had made mention that she got a call from her financial institution and that her mortgage payoff was late. So we started investigating. My team digs in and we're working through the process with the buyer's title company who had wired the funds. And they did some back end checking and started the whole process, realizing that, you know, they got a second email from us saying, here's an updated payoff for Alicia. They did not use certified on the back end for vetting those wires and checking anything. So that wire, although it was sent from someone, a threat actor who had spoofed an email looking like it was coming from our office, you know, copying that whole chain of communication and changing it, hiding the domain. So all you could see was the name that appeared to be consistent with who you were communicating with previously. So a lot of, again, back end threat actors in your environment, people, you know, whether it stemmed, you know, it stems from somewhere, clicking an attachment, clicking a link, opening something, and it can be that simple that you don't even realize you're doing. It can look like it's from someone legitimate, but there could have been a breach on their end, and that threat actor could be, you know, in their environment as well, just watching communication and able to capture ours. I mean, these are all things I've learned through this process. Trust me, I didn't know any of this before, nor did I want to. I didn't start a title insurance company in order to learn IT and fraud and security and all of these things. So third wire is missing. I'm not financially, and it's not my fiduciary responsibility since the money didn't leave my escrow account, but it is still a responsibility and obligation I have to my clients to be part of the solution and help with any efforts that I can. So like I said, taking all of this stuff going on, again, it was chaos. I felt like I was number one in the twilight zone, but in the middle of a tornado in that twilight zone as well, with all of this CIA cybercrime units, FBI cybercrime units, IC3 reports, Federal Trade Commission, fraud divisions of banks, learning about voiceover apps. Well, forensic diagnostics are being done on our computers, and we can go through and find every email that was touched in our system, and insurance companies that are saying, no, because of this, we're not going to cover this. And because of that, you know, we're not going to cover these pieces. So I'm feeling like I am so out of my element. I don't know what questions to even ask because there was no guidance. So in my case, just to summarize, I could probably tell you there's a million little details that would take me a week to share. But figuring out how to survive during that mode and still operate and do business and make sure your environment is safe. Like I said, it was probably the scariest time in my life where there were so many unknowns, my livelihood and being able to do what I love. Like the title industry is amazing, and I'm so passionate about it, and it doesn't feel like work, and I've loved it every day that I've been in it. So thinking about, well, how would I support myself if I had to go not do title? I wouldn't love the next thing that I do because I love title. I don't know that I could support myself with no other education other than being in title. It was, and I'm 50 years old. You know, in the middle of my life going, I might have to start over and the rug might just have been pulled out from under me. The peace of mind that I had and what kept me going is I have a little girl that needs someone to be strong and provide for her. And the support that the certified team provided, the support from my underwriter, the support from my team in digging in, and how do we continue and not look back and say, oh, there's a problem and who made the mistake and pointing fingers. It was more, let's move forward and let's figure out where these little loopholes fall and let's put patches on them to make sure we're safe right now, but let's implement that team to make sure that these types of situations don't happen. I'm glad I learned it in year 2 instead of year 22 when there was maybe more activity or a larger company or a potentially bigger loss. I'm sick that it happened, but the fight that you have to say, it's not just about me, it's about the protection of our clients, the protection of their money, the trust that they provide in us, and making sure that they're safe. like I said, the team and the conversations. Tom, actually, you and I had chatted multiple times. I've chatted with Nate. I've chatted with people that you've put me in contact with to talk about IT things and insurance, all of the resources that someone couldn't provide, and tell me where do I even start? I was, like I said, I was so out of my element, and I'm going, I'm panicked, I'm scared, I'm sick, I am pacing the floor, and I don't even know where to begin. I'm like, I throw my hands up and go, someone tell me where do I start with this? But again, first call, certified. If hindsight looking back, if I wouldn't have taken just an easy way out and bought a package bundle thinking I was getting the benefit of certified, I would change that in a heartbeat, because the protection, the amount of work that you take off of my plate, the amount of security that you provide me, so I can worry about title. I don't have to worry about cyber fraud and what's going on. Your team and the certified team has educated my whole team and myself and opened my eyes to this whole world I didn't want to believe existed in St. Cloud, Minnesota. These are all of those things that now I can focus on title. I don't have to worry about my environment being safe. I've learned so much, and I'm so grateful for all of the support and the teamwork and resources that have been provided. And I just, like I said, the whole goal is, as much as it makes me sick to talk about, I hope that it helps protect someone else, that maybe someone who's not using certified or that's not taking these precautions, takes those steps and measures before you end up in my situation and in my shoes, because it is not fun. It is far from over, and I'm 4 months in, thinking of, how long is it going to take to figure this out? Insurance not covering anything. And, we were fortunate. We recovered $299,000, $295.76 of the $311,000 wire, in the middle of October. We received those funds back. But again, that was August, the whole month of August, September, and part of October, 3 months of grueling going, are we going to get anything back? What is taking so long? Was this personal? Trying to identify if this was like, how could someone come and take money from me? Like, it had to be someone who was angry with me, or, was it a disgruntled ex-partner or whatever. It feels so personal, where you go, you may as well have broken into my home and rummaged through everything and stolen everything that I had, that I loved.
Sarah,
so in a nutshell.
Yeah, I have no questions for you. Like, there's nothing I can add. That is a phenomenal and courageous summary of your journey since August. I call it tuition. I've paid it.
A hell of a tuition.
It is, right?
Mhm.
And it's not just a check you get to write. You got to sit through the course.
Right. And
You
again,
got to complete the course, and you're completing the course. And we talked about this last week. I would argue you're going to be one of the safest agents to do business with for the rest of your career in the state of Minnesota, period. Because you'll forever be changed with what you went through. You will never not think about this. You can't.
absolutely.
Right.
And I'm sure, like you, Tom, you probably have the same thing. Like, I can remember what I was wearing, exactly where I was when my phone rang to tell me that, receive that call saying that wire is missing.
Yeah,
I mean, I could tell you the exact time of day, and it's just like, oh my goodness. Again, life changing, but the support and the gratitude I have for the certified team is to eternity and back.
No, we're on this together. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you. And hopefully you can hang out for this next one, because there's a lot of learn. Okay. So
absolutely.
Sarah, thank you so much. I mean,
Absolutely.
amazing journey that you've had. And in the thick of it, you were a fighter. I mean, I can attest to that with the conversations that we'd have in the evenings and weekends, and like, let's hang in, we're just letting a little more information. We're hanging in.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have this mitigated down, guys, to what's the shortfall currently, like the total shortfall, Sarah? We have this thing mitigated down to a level right now.
Right. We are right at, we are about 100 and we are at 100 and 68,000 that we had lost. The rest had been recovered
Yeah, of
out
over
of almost
600,000 lost
900,000.
on the two
Yeah.
wires. Yeah. So with
Correct.
a lot of time in water under a very risky bridge. So,
Mhm.
all right. Well, with that, let's switch gears. Our last profile from a fraud vector standpoint is seller impersonation. I'll reshare my screen just for a second. And Joe, I'll ask you just for one more thumbs up from you can see it. Okay, so a case was settled earlier this year. The Dr. Kenensberg case was one of those most widely publicized because it wasn't the New York Post, I think, picked this up over a series of stories that was run, and then it was syndicated across the country. And I'm not going to speak because I'm not the expert, but we have the two transaction participants that are. But essentially, a seller impersonator listed and sold a lot in Fairfield, Connecticut for around $350,000 in the fall of 22, unbeknownst to the actual property owner, who I believe was a retired doctor at the time. And then they commenced construction on a $1.5 million home, almost like a, spec, but custom to be completed and then sold off to the buyer. So the developer was ultimately involved in the litigation. It went to court, settled earlier this year, and we happen to have Anthony, who was part of the transaction that ultimately allowed the lot to close and then move forward with the construction, and Joe, claims counsel of Caddick, that was intimately involved with, well, what happens next. So the level of social engineering on this one, guys, was nothing short of not just intentional, but absolutely phenomenal. I've got to know Anthony a bit over the last few weeks leading up to this, as well as Joe. And Anthony, I guess we just want to fast forward. You were referred the transaction from what would have been the listing agent, I'm assuming, right?
Correct. Yep.
And then just get us maybe halfway through to where, this thing's getting close to closing, and, you believe you're communicating at some point with Dr. Kenneth, the owner, right?
Right.
And how did they convince you of that, which ultimately led to not only the closing, the issuing of, the commitment in the policy to close it. How did we get there?
So, quick overview. I was referred this closing, just like however many dozens, hundreds that we've done over the years, from a real estate agent who I've worked with many times before. And I got to represent this guy. He's selling some property that he inherited years ago. He's an expat. Okay, I could do that. We have to do a few more steps because he's out of the country, but yeah, we can do it. So I had a very long phone conversation with this fellow from overseas who told me that he was Dr. Kenningsberg, or, well, Daniel Kenningsberg. He didn't say he was a doctor. I had no reason to know that the real owner was a doctor, and figured that out later. And we've heard these themes about the spoofed emails. This was just Daniel Kenningsberg at yahoo.com. And so you didn't have the domain name thing. You didn't have the, like Mike Musto was talking about before, the letter transposition. You had his name, and what added to a layer of security was a telephone number. And I had a number of conversations with him. I have other clients that are overseas or in the Caribbean, and so I have a calling card. So okay, I dial my code and talk to my client, and he would call me. I would call him. We talked a number of times. Typical interaction. This is the procedure. This is what we have to do. I represented the fake seller. There was another local attorney who represented the buyer and actually issued the policy. The buyer being a completely innocent party in the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yep.
And that's where Joe comes in. He's title counsel for the buyer's title company. So we close it. He goes to the.
I'm going to interrupt you a couple
Yeah.
times, Anthony, but in fairness, the email and the phone number came from the listing agent. I want to be clear.
Yes.
This wasn't a
Yep.
spook. It's like,
Yep.
hey,
No, this was
here's
not a
my
spook. This
client.
was-
I got this
your
listing. Here's a client. Let's roll.
Here's your client's contact info.
Right.
So
Right,
I
so
had.
it wasn't, to your point, it wasn't what we talked about with Mike. You were fed this information from the listing agent, who also didn't understand who they were working with.
Right.
Right.
And then you know, hey, you have to go to the U.S. Embassy to get these documents notarized. And by the way, let's do it as a power of attorney so that you don't have to worry about doing a deed at a particular time, and I could just sign everything for you. That was a mistake, and I don't do that anymore, by the way.
Let me clarify that. He went to the embassy to get a
He
power
went-
of attorney signed,
Right, to make me power of attorney.
so that you could be power of attorney to sign what would be his seller docs.
Correct.
Got it.
And don't anybody do that, because that adds an extra layer of liability onto the whole thing. So he goes, he tells me he goes to the embassy, he FedExes me the documents. We later find out he didn't go to the embassy. He forged stamps and seals with, you know, the United States seal on them. And I had a load of fake papers that transmitted to buyer's counsel, who admittedly accepted them just as I would have done had I been on the buyer's side, probably. And months later, this is like October that we closed. Months later, I get a call from another local attorney who I know, who says, hey, a while ago you did this closing, and it was a total fraud because the person that you represented was pretending to be somebody else. And I jaw drops to the floor, just like Sarah. And like, okay, what do I do now? What a giant mess. So there we are.
Joe, I'm going to have you pull that thread a little further. You get involved at what points, and we can just kind of open it up. And guys, if there's any questions, this would be the one. These are so incredibly sophisticated and the fastest growing fraud vector that we're seeing across the country. So, Joe, when does your phone ring?
Yeah, so let's just talk real quickly about how does title insurance get involved in a situation like this. And when you think about the parties involved and this particular fraud, and you're thinking about title insurance coverage, you should look at this in terms of two different scenarios. One being when a fraud happens in someone's purchase of the property, so the buyer. Okay, and that's where we were involved. Caddick was involved in insuring the buyer. But you also have to understand the situation. Think about, well, what about, Dr. Kenningsberg as the current owner? Might he have had some title insurance coverage? I can't speak to whether Dr. Kenningsberg did, but what I can tell you is a buyer in a transaction, if they have an owner's policy, even a standard owner's title insurance policy, generally speaking, will have coverage for a fraud where it is learned later, and the buyer had nothing to do with it, that the seller was an imposter. So in our situation where Caddick had insured 51 Skytop partners, basically there was coverage. So there were title insurance resources coming their way to help them. Now, in terms of the current owner, the true owner, Dr. Kenningsberg, it's a little bit more complicated. Generally speaking, title insurance doesn't cover post-policy events. So if Dr. Kenningsberg acquired title of this property 20 years ago, this would obviously be post-policy date for him, this event, right? But there are expanded policies, expanded owners policies that provide coverage for, let's just keep it simple, post-policy fraud. Now, again, I don't know if he had any such policy, but you want to understand how title insurance got involved here. And so in Skytop's case, it was fortunate that they had purchased a title insurance policy, an owner's policy, and they had coverage. And so once they found out, oh God, we've got a problem here, And bear in mind that there was a house that they had constructed that was approximately 80 to 90% complete at the time that they discovered their title might be a fraud. They did the right thing and they filed a claim with their title insurance company. And so that's when we got involved.
Did construction immediately stop when you were notified?
So it's hard to give you a real definite answer on that. I think that they probably at least tapped the brakes when they learned this news. Now, this brings up a good point. And I kind of was getting at this earlier with Mike's incredible story, is there are situations where you could imagine as a practitioner, and you want to be aware of this, where let's say that your client purchases undeveloped land. Well, if they're buying a lot, that is going to be at a certain value that is significantly less than if they develop that lot and build out a home. So you can have a situation here where your client purchases land for, let's make up a number, let's say $100,000, but then improves that property to the tune of much more value. So in a situation like that, which is, similar to what we're talking about here, there was a home that was practically constructed. So you could have a scenario where your client is exposed to damages well even beyond what their title insurance policy covers. So what does that mean for you as a practitioner? If you've got some liability in this thing, it could be significantly over any even title insurance coverage. So just keep that in mind, that this can happen. And I think that's part of why this story was picked up and it got such great attention, is that people had a hard time believing that, oh my God, not only did one of these frauds happen, but a house was practically built before anyone discovered it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very interesting. So Anthony, let's go back. Anything to backfill there? Otherwise, I have one direct question for Joe from what is an underwriter's next move? And Joe can decide not to answer these questions, but press in a little bit further.
Sure. No, that's a great. Oh, is this Anthony or directed at me? I'm sorry.
Joe, you take that because I'll have a post.
Yeah. So what's your next move? So I'm a large agent in Michigan.
Right.
If I screw up, there's something called agent error that gets coded on some claims reports. And then the underwriter will, in a polite but direct way, say, hey, bud, I took care of this at the consumer level, but we're seeking reimbursement either directly or we'll trigger an E&O claim.
So title insurance companies, generally speaking, this is a pretty general application. The policies are all pretty similar on this aspect. When a claim is filed, the companies have broad discretion on whether they want to pay the loss outright, just write a check, pay an indemnity payment to the insured. In this case, that could have been probably the policy limit, as you can imagine. If they choose to do that, the companies obviously have subrogation rights to pursue anyone that is at fault. Now, that's a case-by-case scenario. We really, can't get too far into the weeds on that, but that is like in any other type of insurance, subrogation rights. But title insurance companies also have the right, when a claim is filed, to basically not pay the claim immediately, but to instead defend title or try to establish title as insured, and really do any reasonable thing to try to mitigate a loss. So they can hire attorneys for the insured, defend the insured's title, try to negotiate a settlement. So the latter was the direction that essentially we went in. How could we help this insured who had losses significantly even beyond the title insurance policy coverage? That was the direction that we felt made the most sense, and that was the direction that we went in.
Got it. Anthony, I'll hand it over to you.
So that's what the buyer's attorney, the policy issuer, does. What does the seller's attorney do besides look over which window to jump out of? So my first call was to my malpractice, E&O agent. And then I had to fill out some forms, and pretty quickly they got me with a claims adjuster. We filed, they told me, and then like within a day, I had counsel, go to the FBI, go to the local police, So followed all those recommendations right away, filed reports, prepared a number of different narratives for, all saying the same thing, for these different, for my attorney, for my carrier, for police, for the FBI. Investigations began. To my knowledge, no funds on my deal had ever been recovered, but to Joe's point, the real damages were to the buyer who constructed the house. The lot sold for $350. We had to do some tax withholding because the imposter seller was, refused to give a social security number, which in hindsight probably was a red flag. But I've done these before and people get flaky about that. So maybe not. I don't know what I would have thought of it. And so we had held some money back from the original sale, after paying, commissions and conveyance taxes and all the usual stuff that we have, attorney's fees. And so what ended up happening was I had been holding in escrow a block of money, that ended up going, it went back to the buyer, as part of the damage calculation. So, there was some, but the real damages were the cost of construction of this beautiful home. That was ultimately part of the settlement. Was it was sold to a third party, and everybody thankfully lived happily ever after on this one.
Yeah. I have one question for you, Anthony, and one more for you, Joe, as we almost hit time here. Anthony, how do the rest of us avoid this?
So there's a few things, and this is, hindsight is of course 2020. I am not comfortable closing with somebody who is not physically present unless I already have an established attorney-client relationship with them. If it's somebody I've known for a long time that has happened to, maybe move out of state, or a client that I'm doing constant transactions for, that's, away on business or something like that. If you're not here, we're not closing. And if you're going to be leaving Connecticut, let's meet and pre-sign stuff before you go, for everything that has to be done in person. And I'm going to get your ID, which, by the way, is not foolproof, because I did get an ID from a guy named Daniel Koenigsberg. That was a foreign passport. Don't accept foreign passports. That's another one. Use Certified to verify wire information, because we ended up wiring to this guy. And as if you don't know, the name where you wire to and the account number do not need to match on the receiving bank end. The banks don't check that. They just check a routing number and an account number. If it exists, the wire goes through and you're done. So learn that. And then let's see. What else? Don't trust realtors. No offense if anybody's a realtor here. You got to do your own verification. You can't rely on what other people give you. The realtor, really good guy, would close with him again if he referred me something, but I would verify who it was, talk to the person, etc. But of course, this was very socially engineered, and had a number of lovely conversations with a guy named Daniel Koenigsberg. There's really no hard and fast way, but when you're in vacant land, send a letter or something, being very careful to maintain attorney-client privilege to a verifiable address of record, such as a tax bill. Hey, verifying this ownership, something. Done a few transactions since this where either the seller was not present, and I was on the buy side on one of them, but we were able to. I worked with seller's counsel who knew my story, and I told him, there's red flags all over this one. Let's make double sure that you don't want to go through what I'm going through now. It was happening in the thick of it, and we were able to successfully verify his client on a number of different platforms, and that transaction closed without issue.
I like that, and it's easy to get lost that, well, I'm not on the sell side, so who cares?
No, but buyers are getting sued on this one too. So everybody got sued.
Joe, one question for you. So the
all members of our respective state bars, right? Had this not settled, as part of the settlement, Dr. Kennensberg received quiet title judgment to expunge the fraudulent deed, essentially. Correct. Had that not settled, and maybe, and this is to you as well. I mean, let's put our legal hats on. No precedent for this that I could find nationally. One edge case about a foreclosure of a veteran that was deployed to Afghanistan during the crisis. And he ended up with the property. He ended up with a check, not the property. That was interesting. So who would have ended up with the house? Who would have ended up with the land? Yeah, I mean, I think, we don't have a decision on this that we can point to with these facts, but I think I would lean towards the true owner. It's similar to something we occasionally see in title that we call like a rogue chain of title. That would sort of follow sort of the basic concept that you can't get good title from a place where title never existed. That would be sort of the basic reasoning. And we don't have a case, that would have these facts that we can point to. These are serious, severe claims that should be settled. Yes. I should say, should be avoided in the first place. Oh, no, wind up one of these settled. Yeah, I understand. Andy, what would you say to that?
I echo Joe, basically for same reasoning, and remember from law school, real estate is unique, unlike goods, unlike money. I think that had this gone to trial, which would be 2 years from now, you'd have a judgment and so forth. I think the real owner would have Koenigsberg would have gotten the property back along with some probably damages to restore it in some way, and maybe something over and above that, I don't know. And then the buyer would have also gotten, dollar for dollar plus attorney's fees plus a lot, maybe over and above that. But fortunately, you had a lot of reasonable parties and a really great federal magistrate who knocked everybody's heads together, and we were able to settle the thing within a year of it being discovered.
Yeah. Recognizing we're over time, I'll close with this. Guys, thank you. Thank you. I've been wanting to have this conversation for now months once we set this up months ago. All of the situations we talked about today were preventable. We can see, right? We're armchair quarterbacking on a Monday morning, and it's easy to do. The verifying of identities, absolutely. Your vacant land, your non-owner occupied, I would dare say by next summer, standard practice will be we're just verifying all parties in a transaction, because identity theft and identity impersonation is really kind of the root cause at the end of the analysis of how these things take place. Verifying payoffs, like we heard from Sarah, every single time, every payoff going through PayoffProtect. Hard stop. We will administer the callback for you guys if we don't have the record. We are detecting fraud every single day, multiple times a day through that platform. It's so incredibly active. And then just having the insurance. So we also heard that nobody had insurance coverage. All the insurance, and I'm not speaking to Joe, I'm speaking to the E&O, the cyber. Nobody was there to say, oh yeah, great. This is a perfect situation where you have claims coverage. None of that, because they're so heavily nuanced, and the social engineering typically falls through a crack. So with Certified, the direct insurance piece of it would pick up if our system fails to properly identify, or the PayoffProtect solution properly or improperly fails to validate, and you rely upon that. That's why we're doing what we're doing. So with that, guys, thanks for hanging out. I suspect for a little bit long, but Joe, any last words? Anthony, any parting pieces of wisdom? I guess just I would say we're all in this together. Lean on the resources that are out there that Certified has, your title insurance companies like Caddick. Lean on those resources. We all want to prevent these frauds.
And if anybody tries to rush you through something, tell them stop. No, I'm verifying it. I don't care. And if it takes an extra day or two, too bad.
No, I love that.
That's another aspect of the fraudster tries to rush you. Don't believe it.
Yeah.
Right.
Do your homework. Practical advice. Yep.
Good
All right,
point.
guys. With that, thanks for everyone for attending and hanging out a little bit long. I hope you guys have a blessed holiday season, and we will be picking back up the To Catch a Fraudster series in January. So with that, thanks again, Joe and Anthony and Sarah and Mike. Unbelievable stories. Truly
Thank you.
unbelievable. Yep.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks.
Stay safe, guys.
Take your time.
Yep.